Martin shot her a look. Was that a joke? Did you just make a joke? Of course not, she said smoothly, but the faintest twitch of her lips betrayed her amusement. They reached the central platform, where Varen awaited them, his expression as stern as ever. The advisor had an uncanny knack for looking like he was perpetually disapproving of something. Your Majesty, Varen said, bowing deeply to Zytheria before glancing at Martin. His bow to him was significantly shallower. I trust your consort is prepared for the proceedings? Define prepared, Martin said, earning a sharp glance from Zytheria. He is as prepared as he needs to be, Zytheria said smoothly, stepping forward to take her place at the head of the table. She gestured for Martin to sit beside her. As Martin settled into his seat, he noticed the dignitary across from him, a tall insectoid being with multifaceted eyes and delicate spindly limbs, watching him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. He offered an awkward smile and a small wave. The insectoid tilted its head, then made a clicking noise that Martin could only hope wasn't an insult. What do I do if I offend someone? Martin whispered to Zytheria as plates of food began materializing before them, transported by hovering trays. You will not offend anyone if you simply follow my lead, she replied. Martin snorted. Yeah, that's going to work great. I'm the guy who accidentally proposed to you by trying to make a toast. Zytheria gave him a sidelong glance. It is an unusual situation, she admitted. Unusual? Martin said, raising an eyebrow. That's putting it lightly. This is intergalactic-level awkward. Their conversation was interrupted as Varen stepped forward to address the gathered guests. Honored dignitaries, esteemed members of the court, he began, his voice carrying easily across the hall. We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the union of our queen with her chosen consort. Martin winced as a murmur rippled through the crowd. The words chosen consort seemed to spark a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and, he was pretty sure, thinly veiled amusement. Great, he muttered under his breath. I'm the main course of the evening. Silence, Zytheria whispered sharply. Varen continued, his tone formal and deliberate. As is tradition, the consort must participate in the rite of concordance, a ceremony symbolizing unity and mutual understanding between worlds. Martin froze. The what now? Zytheria turned to him, her expression unreadable. It is a simple ritual. You will address the court and answer a single question posed by a representative of the dignitaries. Address the court? Martin hissed. I didn't sign up for a public speech. It is customary, Zytheria said. Martin groaned, slumping slightly in his seat. Of course it is. What's the question? It will depend on the representative, Zytheria said, her voice calm but firm. You must respond honestly and with confidence. They will be judging your character. Martin let out a soft, nervous laugh. Oh, good. No pressure. As Varen finished his introduction, an elder Zalvonian dignitary rose from the far end of the table. The representative was a striking figure, with a tall, willowy frame and robes that shimmered like starlight. Their voice, when they spoke, was melodic yet commanding. Consort of the Queen, the dignitary said, their glowing eyes fixed on Martin. What do you believe is the most important quality in a ruler? Martin blinked. The question hung in the air, heavy with expectation. He glanced at Zytheria, who gave him a barely perceptible nod, urging him to answer. His mind raced. Honesty, strength, intelligence. What did they want to hear? But then, as he looked around the room, at the skeptical stares, the murmured whispers, and even Zytheria's carefully composed mask, he realized something. They didn't want to hear the right answer. They wanted to hear his answer. Martin took a deep breath, standing and addressing the room. I think, he began, his voice steadier than he expected, the most important quality in a ruler is knowing that you don't have all the answers. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but he pressed on. Look, I'm not a ruler. I'm just a guy who stumbled into this whole thing by accident, but I think what makes a great leader is realizing that you can't do it alone. You need people who challenge you, support you, and keep you grounded. And maybe, Just maybe, if you surround yourself with the right people, you can figure it out together. The room fell silent. Martin glanced nervously at Cytherea, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. Finally, the dignitary inclined their head. A thoughtful response, they said. Let us hope your actions reflect your words. Martin sat back down, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure if he'd passed whatever test this was, but at least he hadn't tripped over his own words or his own feet. Cytherea leaned toward him, her voice barely a whisper. That was unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected? Martin whispered back. Her lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. Good. For the first time that evening, Martin felt a tiny spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of his depth. The first thing Martin learned about intergalactic diplomacy was that it was mind-numbingly boring. The second thing he learned was that boring didn't mean easy. He sat in a grand chamber known as the Hall of Concord, surrounded by delegates from over a dozen different species, each more bizarre and intimidating than the last. The room itself was a marvel of alien design, gleaming metallic walls adorned with pulsating glyphs, ceilings that stretched impossibly high, and a central dais that shimmered with a constant holographic projection of the Zalvonian galaxy. Martin shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His formal robes, while slightly less ostentatious than before, still felt like they'd been designed by someone with a vendetta against comfort. Am I supposed to understand any of this? He whispered to Cytherea, who sat beside him, her posture impeccable and her expression unreadable. No, she replied quietly, her eyes fixed on the proceedings. Your role is to observe and learn. Great, Martin muttered. Observing is my favorite. The meeting was in full swing, with various delegates taking turns to address the room. Martin struggled to keep track of who was who. There was the towering, crystalline entity, whose voice sounded like a wind chime caught in a storm, the small rodent-like diplomat, who spoke in rapid-fire bursts, and the amphibian-like figure whose words were translated by a hovering sphere. Every now and then, Cytherea would lean toward him and offer a brief explanation. They are discussing trade agreements, she said at one point. Specifically, the regulation of starship fuel exports in the Talthir sector. Martin blinked. That's what they're arguing about? Fuel exports? It is a matter of great importance, Cytherea said. Sure, Martin said, trying not to yawn. Super important. Riveting stuff. As the hours dragged on, Martin found his mind wandering. He began to imagine what his friends back on Earth would think if they could see him now, sitting in a room full of aliens, trying not to fall asleep while intergalactic politics unfolded around him. It was the kind of thing he'd have laughed at if it weren't happening to him. Martin. Cytherea's voice snapped him back to reality. Huh? What? He said, sitting up straighter. It is your turn to speak, she said, her tone calm but firm. Martin's stomach dropped. Wait, what? Nobody told me I'd have to say something. I informed you this morning, Cytherea said, her gaze steady. You did? Martin racked his brain but came up blank. Was that before or after the 12-course breakfast? Now is not the time for excuses, Cytherea said. You will address the delegates and reaffirm your commitment to the principles of unity and cooperation. Martin stared at her. Reaffirm my what now? Before he could protest further, all eyes in the room turned to him. The murmurs quieted, and an expectant silence fell over the chamber. Martin stood slowly, trying to ignore the way his palms were sweating. His mind raced for something, anything, to say that wouldn't make him look like a complete idiot. Hi, he began, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. I'm Martin. You probably already know that, though. Kind of hard to miss the new guy, right? A few of the delegates exchanged puzzled looks while others leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Anyway, Martin continued, I just wanted to say that, I'm honored to be here. Really. I mean, this is all pretty overwhelming, to be honest. Back on Earth, the biggest thing I had to deal with was deciding whether to get fries or onion rings with my burger. A ripple of amusement spread through the room. Cytherea shot him a warning glance, but Martin pressed on. But seriously, he said, his tone softening. I get that this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Different worlds, different cultures, trying to find a way to work together. And I don't know much about intergalactic diplomacy, but I do know that cooperation isn't easy. It takes effort, it takes patience, and sometimes it takes a lot of awkward conversations. He glanced at Cytherea, who was watching him intently. But it's worth it, Martin said, because when we work together, we're stronger, and honestly, I think that's pretty amazing. He sat down to a smattering of applause, polite, reserved, but genuine. Cytherea leaned toward him, her voice low. That was adequate. Gee, thanks, Martin muttered. After the meeting, Martin found himself cornered by one of the delegates, a reptilian being with iridescent scales and a voice like gravel. You speak well, human, the delegate said, their yellow eyes narrowing. Thanks, Martin said, unsure if it was a compliment or a threat. But words are only the beginning, the delegate continued. We will be watching to see if your actions match them. No pressure, Martin said with a nervous laugh. The delegate didn't respond, simply inclining their head before slithering away. Cytherea appeared at his side, her expression thoughtful. You made an impression, she said. Good impression or bad impression? Martin asked. That remains to be seen, Cytherea said, but they are paying attention. That is a start. Martin sighed. This whole consort to the queen thing is way more complicated than I thought. It is not a role to be taken lightly, Cytherea said. Yeah, I'm getting that, Martin said. He glanced at her. How do you do it? Stay so composed all the time? It is my duty, she said simply. Martin frowned. Yeah, but don't you ever feel like, I don't know, just being yourself for once? No titles, no court, no pressure. Cytherea hesitated, her gaze distant. That is not a luxury I can afford. Martin was about to respond when Varen appeared, his expression as severe as ever. Your Majesty, Varen said, bowing slightly. There is a matter that requires your attention. Cytherea nodded, her composure snapping back into place. Of course, excuse me, Martin. As she walked away, Martin couldn't help but wonder if there was more to her than the perfect, unshakable queen everyone else saw. And if there was, maybe he'd find a way to see it. Martin had always believed in happy endings, though his definition of one had drastically shifted since the day he accidentally proposed to an alien queen. What started as an impulsive mistake had transformed into a journey that had tested every ounce of his patience, wit, and courage. And now, standing on the observation deck of the Royal Zalvonian starship as it floated serenely in orbit around its twin suns, Martin wasn't sure what came next, but for once he wasn't worried. The air on the deck was thick with the hum of energy fields and the faint aroma of alien blossoms. Cytherea stood beside him, her figure illuminated by the warm golden light of the suns. She wore no royal regalia tonight, just a simple gown of flowing silver fabric that shimmered like moonlight. It was a rare sight, seeing her without the weight of her crown or her carefully constructed composure. You're quiet, Martin said, breaking the silence. Cytherea glanced at him, her expression unreadable. I have much to consider. About what happened down there? He asked, nodding toward the planet below. The official summit had ended only hours ago, with an agreement that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. Trade disputes resolved, alliances forged, and a particularly angry reptilian delegate begrudgingly pacified. That, she said with a faint smile, and everything else. Martin leaned on the railing, his gaze drifting to the stars. Do you think it'll last? The alliance, I mean? Cytherea was silent for a moment. Perhaps, she said finally, but it will require vigilance. The galaxy is vast, and old wounds are slow to heal. Trust must be earned and maintained. Right, Martin said, letting out a long sigh. Guess that means more speeches, more awkward dinners, and more trying not to offend anyone situations. Cytherea turned to him fully, her expression softening. You handled yourself admirably, Martin. More than I expected. He raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? Did I just get a royal seal of approval? Do not let it go to your head, she said, though there was a hint of warmth in her tone. Martin grinned. Too late. They stood in companionable silence for a while, the twin suns dipping lower on the horizon of the planet below. Martin marveled at the surreal beauty of it all. This life he'd stumbled into, this strange and vibrant world he now called home. Can I ask you something? He said after a while. You may, Cytherea replied. Why me? He asked, his voice quieter now. Of all the people in the galaxy, why'd you decide to stick with me? I mean, I'm just a guy from Earth. I don't know anything about ruling a kingdom or negotiating intergalactic treaties. Half the time, I don't even know which fork to use at dinner. Cytherea studied him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. You are unlike anyone I have ever known, she said finally. You see the world with a simplicity and sincerity that is rare among leaders. You do not seek power or prestige. You act out of instinct, and though your methods are unconventional, your intentions are always genuine. Martin blinked, taken aback. Wow, that was way deeper than I expected. Cytherea allowed herself a small smile. You asked. Well, Martin said, rubbing the back of his neck, for what it's worth, I think you're pretty amazing too. You're strong, smart, and terrifying in the best way possible. Her smile widened just a fraction. Terrifying? In a good way, Martin said quickly. Like you're the kind of person who can stare down a room full of angry aliens and make them listen. I could never do that. You underestimate yourself, she said. Maybe, he admitted. But I think that's okay. I mean, I'm learning. And honestly, I wouldn't have made it this far without you. Cytherea looked away, her gaze returning to the stars. We have come a long way, haven't we? Yeah, Martin said, his voice soft. We really have. The next day, the palace was alive with celebration. The summit's success had sparked a wave of hope across the Zalvonian Empire, and a grand festival had been declared. The streets were filled with music, laughter, and the glow of bioluminescent decorations. Martin wandered through the festivities, trying his best to blend in, though his earthling status made that nearly impossible. People greeted him with cautious curiosity, some even bowing, which still made him feel weird. He spotted Cytherea near the central plaza, surrounded by a crowd of admirers and officials. Despite the chaos around her, she remained poised, her presence commanding as ever. Martin hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but then her eyes met his, and she gave him the faintest nod. Taking a deep breath, he made his way over. Enjoying the party? He asked, trying to sound casual. It is lively, she said, her tone carefully neutral. Yeah, I noticed, Martin said with a grin. I think someone offered me a glowing drink earlier. Pretty sure it wasn't safe for humans, though. Cytherea's lips twitched. You are wise to be cautious. They stood together, watching as the crowd danced and celebrated around them. So, Martin said after a while, what happens now? Now, Cytherea said, we move forward. Together. Martin glanced at her, surprised by the weight of her words. Together, he repeated, a smile tugging at his lips. I think I can live with that. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Martin didn't feel out of place. He didn't feel like the earthling who had accidentally stumbled into a world far beyond his understanding. He felt like he belonged.